Humor is everywhere. It's an extension of human expression that makes its way into all aspects of the world, from day to day conversation, politics, books, pop culture, and art. However, there have been, and there always will be, places, events, or mediums that don't take so kindly to the presence of humor. Places where humor would be inappropriate or would make light of the purpose of gathering. One of these places of contention over the presence of humor is the world of classical music or Western art music. Art music is a term that most often refers to instrumental music of Western traditions that takes advanced theoretical and structural factors into account. However, this definition is slowly expanding to really any music that contains depth of expression while also taking into account theoretical and structural factors of music. But there are these perceptions, however, from audience members, composers, performers, and teachers that humor is not necessarily appropriate in the realm of art music. This is in terms of composition practice, performance etiquette, and especially audience etiquette. This perception, however, that humor has no place in the serious genres of music couldn't be further from the truth. Since the classical period, and perhaps before so as well, there has been plenty of art music that played with humorous expression. Now, as we're looking at these next examples, I want to keep some categories in mind. These will help us group the examples based on similar traits. The categories are inspirational, satirical, and perspective. That being said, let's check out some music. This piece is a recent example of art chamber music incorporating humor through direct inspiration and creative instrumentation. The piece is straightforward. It's based on the jester archetype, the archetypes being a model on behavioral patterns, and so the jester represents one of 12 archetypes and is featured on the appropriately named Grammy-nominated album Archetypes.
Un, dos, tres, can.
We can observe the use of comical instruments, sounds, harmonies, and melodies. Playfully representing humor through the gesture, the piece is able to accurately portray a perspective on humor whilst remaining expressive and artistic. The presence of humor in this example did not take away any legitimacy or seriousness of the piece or the album as a whole. This is another example of art music that uses a source of inspiration as the drive for a humorous piece of music. The piece also includes playful allusions to other pieces of music that inspired the specific creation process. The 14-movement long piece contains numerous humorous allusions to animals, from lions to kangaroos to donkeys. You get the idea. The piece was written in 1866, but never published till after his death. So it was published in the year 1922. This is because Saint-Saëns did not want the piece played during his lifetime, feeling that its frivolity would damage his standing as a serious composer. However, once performed, this would end up being one of his most popular and memorable pieces. Here are a few moments of the piece. To quote a French newspaper and magazine, Le Figaro, we cannot describe the cries of admiring joy let loose by an enthusiastic public. In the immense oeuvre of Camille Saint-Saëns, the Carnival of Animals is certainly one of his magnificent masterpieces. From the first note to the last, It is an uninterrupted outpouring of a spirit of the highest and noblest comedy. In every bar, at every point, there are unexpected and irresistible finds. Themes, whimsical ideas, instrumentation compete with buffoonery, grace, and science. When he likes to joke, the master never forgets that he is the master. Now, with these two examples in mind, the jester and the carnival of animals, we can see evidence of the perspective that humor might diminish the integrity of music or the integrity of the composer, and how that's changed between the 1880s and present day. Potential vehicles for this change are surely changing perspectives on what art is and can be. And we can also see the importance of presentation with its notions of professional etiquette and presentation that spans across all aspects of art, music, and similar genres. I would like to consider the possibility that if humorous ideas and modes of expression are presented in a more conservative fashion in music, that it will retain its level of serious art. In a serious art, it must serve to accurately portray these humorous emotions. With these ideas in mind, of timeline and serious attitudes of both composers and audience members, and the tone of the presentation of the music, let's listen to some more. Mozart was a prolific and renowned composer of the mid to late classical period. In his lifetime, he'd managed to write over 800 pieces of music, spanning essentially every genre of music known to Western society at the time, including his 522nd piece, A Musical Joke, written in 1787 and published in 1797. Take a listen to a few parts. This music is a parody piece, essentially representing poor compositional techniques of the late 18th century. Improper key signatures, repetitive, boring melodies, parts intentionally written poorly or impossible. The piece is innovative, most certainly for its time. The piece shows us use of humorous inspiration derived from parody and satire. It's a piece based on Mozart's view of poor composition practice, and while he never mentioned any one composer specifically, it's safe to assume he had a few in mind. With this perspective, he is able to create a piece that examines music through a humorous lens and have it still be a representation of art music. Another example of the importance of presentation to expressing humor in music. And as renowned a composer Mozart was, he would have had no concerns about the diminishing of his name or of art music in general with this piece of music. In this piece, written sometime after 1878, Fauré openly parodies and mocks themes from one of the most popular and famous operas of all time, The Ring, by legendary German composer Richard Wagner. This is the type of musical humor one would only truly understand, aside from the title, if they were familiar with Wagner's work. Let's listen to this side by side. This piece is an example of musical humor being used to put someone else down. Seems cruel, yeah? Until you inspect a little deeper. Richard Wagner was very openly anti-Semitic, and his published writings at the time, especially Jewishness in music, stirred quite the controversy. There were active protests at performances of his pieces, and a number of composers parodying his work, not just Fauré. An important note is that these composers admit to appreciating Wagner's music and the impact and genius he contributed to Western music. However, they must have felt that his personal views polluted his music to a certain degree. This is satire represented in the music. Fauré does not try to rebrand this idea in any way, and instead just owns the message. And people understand his message. They understand his point of view, and so its seriousness is not necessarily diminished. While the piece is not considered a masterwork, and for the record, neither were the rest of the examples, that has more to do with the nature of comedic music and with what the general public thought or considered what was masterful music than it does with this comedic music not being worthwhile or serious music. Going back to our timeline, considering how comedic music would have been received, we see differences start to emerge. At an 18th century concert, such as Mozart's musical joke, there would have been talk, gossip, food, and drink, and the audience had no obligation to sit quietly and listen. As the 19th century got underway, however, we see these sentiments change, especially with the influence of Wagner himself advocating for an idea of active listening, which is really quite cruel coming from how long most of Wagner's operas tend to be. But this shift in expected audience etiquette surely impacted public perceptions of music and music presentation, and I ultimately think created a much more serious atmosphere surrounding composition and performance. We've seen comedic music taking form through various inspirations and the presence of satire. But another key aspect of humor in music breaks away from this idea of intentional humor on behalf of the composer and refocuses primarily on the audience's perspective. Humor perceived from the audience's perspective can occur in a number of ways, but I think the most common type is when the composer breaks expected norms of musical performance and sound. Throughout the 20th century, new bizarre sounds and instruments have been utilized for their uniqueness and as a way to break away from tradition. Most of the music that fits into this category sits in the realm of avant-garde music. Avant-garde, in my experience, is a subgenre of art music when considering the broader definition of the term. The next piece of music is an example of just that. Music that is approached in all seriousness but has a wide range of musical expression, some of which can be easily perceived as humorous. Here is the music of George Antheil in Ballet Mécanique. Wow, what an experience. The music is almost too much to take in. On top of 16 automatic player pianos, 3 airplane propellers, the piece also uses an array of percussion instruments used for their tact and harshness. Pieces like this set the precedent for true possibilities of music, influencing generations of composers in divergence from traditional music. Now, Ballet Mécanique represents the pinnacle of Dadaist ideology in music. Aimed at reflecting chaos with serious toned underlying messages, this piece can easily be interpreted in several ways. The anarchy and absurdity this music brings to the table are the main drivers for a humorous response. Maybe it's the demonic xylophone runs, the unexpectedness of so many of these instruments, and the harmonic similarities this music has to that of a demonic circus really make this funny in a crazy sort of way. However, not many people could focus on those aspects as at all humorous. As previously stated, Dadaist ideologies influenced the creation of this piece, and humor is an important part of Dada art and expression. To think Antheil wrote this with no humorous intent or thought, I think is far-fetched. He understood the reactions that would come with subjugating audience to such pure cacophony, labeling it as music. Overall, it's clear that humor has historically had a place in the expanding genre of art music and will certainly continue to have a place. The notions that art music is absent of humor were most likely misconceptions based on changes that were occurring in how music should be presented and appreciated. The term art music holds an expectation to represent only the masterworks of instrumental music. However, I think if we rightfully broaden the term, we can notice humor's place in the musical landscape much more clearly. The idea that humor doesn't belong in masterful music expression only serves to put other composers and pieces on a pedestal, and in no way serves to accurately describe the depth of expression that these works represent.